I'm Nancy Schmidt of the Mineral Point Historical Society, and I am just delighted to be here today. It's great to see you and welcome you to our first Lyceum of 2025. So I'd like to introduce Lauren Powers, past president of the Opera House Board, who will be our presenter today. So welcome, Lauren.
Yes. First off, so nice to see a big crowd today. Weren't sure how many people would really end up showing up, but thanks for bearing the cold and bundling up and coming out here. Just the first thing I'd like to say is sort of a disclaimer. I didn't grow up here. I'm not a Mineral Point native. I've been here for almost 25 years, but have an immense appreciation for this theater and try to find as much historical, as many facts as I could. As we know, history is not perfect. It's an approximation of a lot of material, a lot of information, but I just don't want to offend anybody. If I've forgotten names, just know that in an hour to distill 110 years of the Opera House is not an easy thing. So there's so many people who have been involved through the years in various capacities. Everybody's done it out of a love for this place for the most part. And so with that, this is a visual, audiovisual presentation. What we did was worked on going through the archives at the Mineral Point Library. And Shan Thomas, can't thank her enough for all the records that she put together. Fortunately, many things were saved, especially in the early years. So we have immense amount of financial records and programs and train manifests and things from 1915 up until the mid-20s. So copious records were kept, which was helpful. There was a lot to go through, but Shan organized a lot for us, and we just picked out what we could. So we will get started. So, as most of you know, this Opera House was built in they broke ground in 1914. The town where this building stands now, this was the site of the courthouse. And when the courthouse moved to Dodgeville, we had, it was used as a courthouse for a while, but it was empty, and the whole top part had an assembly hall. So they turned that into an opera house. And shows were, there were all sorts of shows that took place in the top floor of that, and it was not fire safe, and there were a lot of the city leaders who were worried about it. So that was torn down. Here's a program from an example of a show that went on there. There were lots of traveling shows with the railroad. We brought people in from far and wide. And so it's just a shot of downtown. So people were talking to the city leaders saying we need a venue for entertainment as well as a new municipal building. So this was torn down, and this is a spot of it. As you can see, where Jail Alley behind it there. So the whole building was designed by Claude and Stark, who was a Madison architectural firm, and they had done many prominent homes in Madison. Almost all the fraternities and sororities were designed by Claude and Stark. They also did the Majestic Theater in Madison, and the Madison Power and Light Powerhouse building, which evidently is still standing, was a famous building in Madison. So they were prominent, and this is a classic revival style. There were obviously it housed City Hall, City Council, and had to have been police and jail. Jail Alley is behind us. So it was considered a true municipal block building, but to put in a theater, the city decided to make it, much more of a grand statement. And on February 15th, Mayor Parmley dedicated it as a theater for all the people. And that's kind of been the theater's motto all through the years. It was paid for, it was planned by city people, it was paid for by the citizens' tax money, and it has remained a community resource. So, and then of course the library, so on the dedication night, which was February 15th, they had all of the entire building open, but the theater was sort of a showcase. And so here is just a nice picture of the outside, original marquee. And the chains, those chains still remain. So a city committee was formed with 3 businessmen from town who worked as management who ran the theater basically. So it was, the last names were Bliss, Martin, and Gorgon, all names that are maybe familiar to people. I think Bliss owned one of the drugstores in town. So they were tasked with running the theater, booking shows, managing all of the finances, and keeping the doors open for the community. So this is what the interior looked like. There were 725 seats. There were about 400 down here. There were 3 something, and then 10 in each of the boxes. And when you walk in now, and we have the assisted seating at the top there are 2 pillars. If you can look behind you, there's 2 pillars right there. Those are the front pillars that you see most close to the stage. So really there was barely any lobby to begin with, because this was a live theater. Didn't really need a ticket office, didn't need, I guess if they had concessions, it was small. But it was really all about getting as many people in here as possible. We're now at 386 seats in the theater. So this is 725 originally. Plus, they didn't have any ADA requirements. There were seats that went all the way to the walls and came very close to, there was always a orchestra pit, but they came very close to the stage. So it's just great that we have these original pictures. And the paint scheme was cream and pastels. And I'll show you later when we get to one of our restoration, the most recent major restoration, we found some ideas that they had thought about, but probably ran out of money. So just really kind of painted the whole place in some pretty light contrast. But they did have the foresight, you see this picture at the very top, to put in a projection booth. So movies were happening, Nickelodeons and short films were being shown, but this was really opened as a live performance theater. But I think they were very glad that they put in a projection booth. So next slide, let's see. This is opening night. So this is a view from stage right of the balcony, looking down with these beautiful hand-painted sets and an organ on the stage. And you can't really see too much in the orchestra pit, but this did fit more musicians and so on. Here's the program from The Misleading Lady. So this was the show that was that opened the theater. So this was opening night, and from the records it says that it was a sold out show, sold out weeks in advance, and all of the boxes were seats were purchased by all the wealthy people in town, and carriages pulled up front, and people were came in all their finery, and it was a big night. It was a crazy farce. The play was not a great play, but everybody enjoyed it. But it had played 400 nights in New York and then went on the road, so everybody was pretty excited that it got booked here. here from the center. The center is the program. This would have been the back of the program with what was coming up. You can see Ivy's Pharmacy was still around. And you might recognize some of the other Martin art.
Corral.
It was Lawrence May Company who was the stock theater company who brought it to town. And they're one of the companies that were the stock companies that kept coming through town year after year. So the review was that it was a good show. Nobody said I gave it great praise, but it was a good show to open with. And from then on, it was just show after show after show. So there were so many different companies that were based in New York or Chicago, some in St. Louis, that were theater stock. They had ensembles. So with the train depot being, down at the bottom of the hill, they would, trains would come in with the actors and a train car with all of the costumes and a train car with all of the sets, and then the crews, and then they would, get men to bring the sets and walk them up Commerce Street, walk them up High Street, and up to the alley and bring them in through the back, probably downstairs, or our loading ramp out here. So it was easy to have shows here because there were so many traveling troops at that point. This was the Sheehan Opera Company. So there was opera, musicians, comedians, vaudeville. I'm sure O'Daddy was one of those bawdy, raunchy vaudeville shows. There were a lot that came through. And just more girls galore. Painless prices. Yeah, the shows were $1.25. The boxes were $1.50, and for 75 cents you could sit upstairs. The Argus Ticket Company is who we purchased tickets through. Would order, hundreds at a time. So again, these are kind of like the artifacts that are in the archives. Every letter, every bit of correspondence, telegraphs going back and forth between the managers and the stock theater companies arranging for the shows to be booked and everything else. And this was a local show, so this was also in 1915, so we're still here in the year that the theater opened. This was in Iowa County, let's see, somewhere it says Iowa County on there. But it was old-time fiddlers, singers, dancers, comedians, and amateurs only were invited to participate. So $50 in cash prizes was a big deal. So just more that we were able to find of programs. So some of these were really big productions. There were a lot of, so they would, like if this, this was probably just a one of, and maybe they do 3 nights, but some of these other groups that were the theater stock outfits, that's why they would bring so much stuff with them. They would do they would come for a week, all the actors, it was like repertory. They would do 5 different plays in a week and sell out the shows. So they get people in every night to the shows, which was great. And here is, there's nothing on here, but I assume the early Mineral Point City Band. Anybody recognize anybody? They look pretty solemn, no women, but definitely right out front. But we had competition. So movies were, definitely growing in people. The enthusiasm was growing, and the need and the desire to have movies. This building right here is the Green Lantern Studios. The Green Lantern, what is now the Green Lantern Studio, was the Green Lantern Hotel. That was the World Theater. So that was a movie theater that had opened up before this opened, actually. And they were showing kind of Nickelodeon, shorts. But they began showing a little longer features, and people were really hungry for movies. It was catching on. So that is, I think most of, let's see, Palace Theater, so strictly movies, but this was where the Green Lantern is, top of High Street. This is near where Mitchell's Hardware. It's either up where Mitchell's Hardware or down. But both of these were showing movies. So at that point, I think the management was trying to shift gears and bring more movies in here. So the first movie, full-length feature to be shown here, unfortunately, was Birth of a Nation by D.W. Griffith. Pretty controversial film. And it played for, let's see if I have my notes here. So this was also brought in by a production company. So they brought the film, they probably brought the projectors, they brought 5 musicians to do a little show ahead of time, but this was a silent film still, so it was still a big production. So I believe over 3 days they did 6 showings of it. A pretty controversial movie for the opening. This is just of one day. The ticket prices, the amount of people, the seats sold, and then totals. And you can see the house only made $113.25. And this was the case in a lot of the cases. There was so much that went to the production companies that the theater wasn't making a killing. But again, it was a city theater. This was open, to have the community have a venue for, a beautiful venue for both live shows and more movies, but not raking in the bucks during the days. And here's a picture postcard from 1920. It's actually it's a rendering. It's not a photograph, but it shows some really nice detail of the front of the building. And the Royal Hotel, right down the street, is really the hotel that housed almost all the actresses and actors and crews. So the vaudeville and plays, all the actresses that would come, because they would come for an entire week, they would camp out here for 6 or 7. They would do five shows a week. They would camp out for about 7 nights. And people got to know some of the actors and actresses. They would be wandering around town. So May Robson was one of the actresses who was a stage actress who was quite prominent in these days, and she fell in love with Mineral Point. So whenever she could, she would come to town. And there's let's see this next slide. No, let me just go back. So there was a story of 2 young girls who lived behind the Royal in Jail Alley. One of the older sisters worked in the Royal, so kind of got to know some of the actresses, and that they said that they would, the quote was that there was a Cora Mueller who in 1961 did a kind of a maybe it was in a newspaper, I'm trying to remember where we saw it. I think it was in a newspaper account, but gave her kind of living history of living back there. And she said all the girls in town all the little girls would just wait for the actresses to come out. And in the next week, they'd all do their hair the same way as the actresses. It was really a big deal to have them in town, and it's sort of endearing that the actresses enjoyed, all the actors as well, enjoyed town. So here's just some of the tickets through the years. Municipal Theater, so it was called the Opera House. It was also called the Civic Hall. It was called the City Auditorium. Had many names through the years. Municipal Theater kind of stuck for a while. This is a more recent one, this white ticket. I think it says, 1970. So this, just to show you some of the other things that went on in town from the beginning and still happening today, is that the community has always used the theater. And so these are programs from mostly the high school class plays. There were commencement when the classes were, I think in the 20s and 30s, commencement took place on stage as well. but all through the years, the high school has always done their plays on stage. And here's just another picture of May Robson, who was so well loved. So more programs. Seats on sale near the invalid's bedside. So here again, just kind of gives you an idea of kind of how they, just different letterheads, just thought they were interesting for the different fonts they used. And there was so much correspondence, whether a lot of telegrams, as I said, a lot of handwritten letters of the management sending notes to New York saying, we have this beautiful theater. There's one note, one letter that said, we have a fully decked out theater, talked about dressing rooms and how many bathrooms there were downstairs. Staging, the proscenium arch size, stage opening, sets and everything, and one of them said, and it's practically fireproof. Not totally. So here's an example. This is a little later. This is 23, but this would have been the accounting that the management would have done for the city, because again, everybody reported into the city. So this would be, so from July to April the next year, some of the income. And here are just some more interesting programs and some more ethnic shows that were featured, very dramatic. The San Carlo Grand Opera Ballet, I couldn't find anything on that. I'm assuming San Carlo, Spain. I'm not sure. Italian production. So from this time moving up to, so this is probably, in the meantime we're showing movies. Movies just weren't going away. So there were movies here when we could get them. And it still cost a lot to rent a first run movie here, but everybody was still pretty thirsty for entertainment. So between 20s, 30s, up until the early 40s, the theater was open on weekends, open when a show like this would come to town, but it was waning a bit. And with more time, we got through the Depression, but movies were a big deal and they weren't, very expensive to attend. So these kinds of shows were coming through, but they needed to make alterations in the Opera House to make it more accommodating for movies, because it just seemed as if movies were going to be the form of entertainment going forward. So there were different people who came in to help manage the theater along with the city guys. And they enlarged the projection booth up top. They did take some seats out because they needed more bathrooms, and they realized they could make more money with having a little bigger lobby and offering concessions. So the concession stand was put in, and by late 1930s, early 40s, this is what the front of the theater looked like. So they had put really a movie marquee with neon that said Point, that then became the Point Theater. So they put this up to allow you to see it from the street, to be lit at night, so when shows were scheduled here, at least they could have the lights on and people knew that they were open for business. But it really became much more of a movie house, and some seats were taken, had to be kind of moved around upstairs and taken out of the balcony as well. But there were probably still maybe 600 seats in here. But here's some other shots of the theater as it looked through the 40s, 50s, up until really the 70s. Mm-hmm. Phone booth, ticket booth. Anybody remember looking like that? Yeah. I think the ticket booth was still here. had a cooking school here before Nicole opened the book kitchen. So this was this was sponsored by the Philco store in town, owned by the Klein family. It's called Klein Electric, and so she was Mary Scott was a noted food lecturer. So she did demonstrations and taught women, it was for women only, to make freezer meals, and from the freezer that you could buy at Klein Electric. Of course. I wish we had pictures of that. So here we are up to the 50s, and again, the theater, there were different management companies who came to town who wanted to run the theater. The city leased it to these management companies for very low rates, so we could keep the theater open. But again, it was hard getting first-run movies. Some of the management companies could, but really, there was competition in Madison. I don't know what was going on at Platteville. I'm sure that Avalon was bringing people in. But after this, 40s, it closed for a while. Another company came in and managed it. We did, community events like this. Here's another community event that took place. I'll use that instead of this. So 1960, Kennedy came to town. And many people remember that. I remember Mike Mitchell telling me his memories of that. Kids got out of school. So he was 9:30 at the Dodge Theater in Dodgeville and came over here at 10:30 to speak. So this brings us up to 61. Okay, the Eccles family took over the theater, took the management of the theater. So as many of you probably know who grew up here, Eccles had the TV and Wi-Fi shop in town, and from what Lynn and Diane, who worked here as teenagers, told me, that one of their brothers was in a pool hall, and Fred pulled him out of the pool hall and said, I gotta find something for you kids to do. So he took over the theater. He did a lot of restoration work. The whole family did restoration work before he opened, but Mrs. Eccles reupholstered some of the chairs. There was some definitely work done to the projection room and concession area, and he also did bring live theater, besides being a movie theater, he brought in live acts from Madison and Milwaukee and so on. So this was, I read that this was in the newspaper, and it was taken out by a bunch of other, a group of other businessmen in town to pay for the ad to encourage him and get the word out. So standing room only was what everyone hoped. And frankly, they were doing they were doing Friday, Saturday shows, and then matinees on Sundays, and charged 25 cents admission, which was great because people could come. And as Lynn had said, it's where everybody came from high school, and the brothers ran the projection room up here. Lynn and Diane ran concessions. You have a nice picture of Lynn Eccles going in here at the concession booth. So this is where the ticket booth is now. So it would have been in front of the original double doors as you come into the lobby. This is where we have the ticket booth. So behind that is probably a wall that was put in. There were a lot of different configurations from those pillars on back, changed through the years. But yeah, popcorn and candy. And then, this is interesting. So there was a gentleman named Cleveland Grant who lived in town. And he was a famous filmmaker. He worked for Walt Disney, and he went all over the world with Disney Productions doing wildlife at different kind of cultural interest shows. So his he owned the films, basically. So he had free rights to show them. So he was able to, I believe he purchased a different projector here. And this is him with his wife and daughter. So these were shown kind of on a, not a regular basis, but people really look forward to these. And this is in the 60s, I think up till mid-60s. I want to show you, okay, from there we go to Shake Rag Players. Shake Rag Players, as I'm sure everybody knows, has been around for about 50 years. Started in the 60s, all local production, directed by local people, and starring all of our talented people in town. So through the 60s, 70s, 80s, up to 90s, we have in the archives at the library numerous programs from the shows with everybody's names in them. They need to be organized. We need, Claire Holland mentioned she has pictures. She was there, she was involved in the early days. Lois Holland was involved in the very early days. We need people to come together to pull together this, but what we were able to find, we found and just thought it'd be interesting to show you what the productions that went on here. 4 and 5 a year, different plays. So this is true community theater. You might recognize some of these faces. Musicals as well. Even a mule on stage. Don't know what play that was from. A lot of the programs, they use historic images on the front cover of the programs. You can recognize that guy. And then at the very end here, you see there's a gap. So when we reopened after the 2008-9 restoration in here, the Shake Rag Players, the month after we opened, they got the script for The Misleading Lady, which was that farce that opened us up in 1915. So they were able, they thought about actually recreating the play, but they literally read it and said, we can't do this. So they did a play reading, and so up at that, let's see, the top you can see, no, it's not from that play reading, but I think this was Steel Magnolias. You can see Mo Grimm in that one top right. And our dear Roland Sardison, Raleigh was in whatever production this was up on stage. This does show this little montage. This was for some of the fundraising materials from the 2008-9 restoration, but we were able to, we did still have the original back panels set from set design from the 1915 opening night, and those had been used off and on through the years. They're stored way up here, and they're in the fly. But we had Ted Landon, who many people know, new in town. He was also involved with Shake Rag Players and did set design. He actually repainted half of one of the sets. So if you can see, the right side is restored. So he was able, one of the panels, he was able to paint that. So we still have that. Okay, now we can go to the next one. So we're still in the 60s, back to the 60s, and what after the Eccles owned it, 61 to 63, or managed it, it closed for a while, and then there was a man in Dodgeville who ran the Dodge Theater named Lee Meister, and he took over the theater and paid for some restoration work. So we had cracked, this is the corner up here in front of the box, so we had cracked plaster and evidently there were some leaks and, things that needed repair. So he did pay for that, and there was a character who came in from Milwaukee. People in the decorative arts know of Julian Ordolini. He was kind of an expert at plaster reconstruction and ornate work. So he was hired, came in from Milwaukee, and there was plaster pieces in the trim that were replaced. So there was a lot of work done because so many things had been altered through the years to make, at one point to put more seats in here, to get more, when movies were a big deal, and then took seats out to make it more of an intimate theater and for safety reasons. So after Lee Meister was here, he kept it open for a couple years, and then he died, and then it closed. So then I believe there was another family, the Smith family, who opened it for a few years. And then this was a teacher, he was from Minneapolis. David Bukowski taught at the elementary school, but he had a love for theater. So as a volunteer, he just took on kind of a personal restoration. So at one point we had, I don't know if you can see the rib, but we had corduroy seats in here. And the configuration, so these were replaced seats obviously from the original. But he put a lot of money into this. I think he raised some money as well. But he wanted it to be used for live theater and also keep it as a movie theater. But his manager, and he was able to convince the city to just rent it to him for a nominal fee. So I think he paid $1 a year to rent it from the city. But unfortunately, he didn't. Here we go. So he had wanted to remove the point marquee, and I believe before he left, he did have that neon kind of envelope that was put over the original. He did have that pulled off, but you can see there were theater doors, the clear glass door panels. This was sort of how it looked for probably 20 years. Then a gentleman from rural Dodgeville who used to run the Pizza Hut, Tom McCarty, he took it on to show some interesting films. So he opened with Last Tango in Paris. There were many other titles. I love this one, Beneath the Valley of the Ultra Vixens. So he loved the theater. There's a whole article in the Dodgeville paper about him. And he was young and enterprising and just thought this was the answer. Adult films at the Mineral Point Theater. But again, it kept the doors open, so I'm sure the city rented it to him. But that didn't last long. So from there, then there were 3 people who took on reopening it. So this takes us up to 1981. It opened with Dolly Parton and Lily Tomlin on 9 to 5. And this was Tom and William Krauth, and his manager was Tom was the acting manager, and Dwayne Kittleson was involved then. So this was an article that was in the paper and talked about what what they hope to do to keep it open, be able to show movies that everybody would want to see, charging 99 cents. I don't know in 81 what we might have paid in a big city, maybe $3, but again, didn't make enough money to keep it going, so it closed again. Valiant effort. And then up in 83, this was an article from the State Journal, 93, this brings us up to 93. An article in the State Journal was published about Burt Bolin and Judge Dyke, who was here, and I think Greg Bennett was involved. There were a lot of people who came together to really establish this more as what it was, and to try and bring it back to the still be a movie theater, but to be a community gathering place, and it needed a lot of help. It needed a lot of restoration. So they formed a nonprofit at this point. So instead of trying to make a profit, turning it into a nonprofit, city still owns the building, lease it from the city. That was what really made sense. So that was really the beginning of it becoming, something that we didn't have to worry about profits and keeping the doors open to keep somebody's living. So all volunteers at this point. And so Bert Boland's idea was to restore it and then bring a Gershwin review as an opener. I think it was a group from Minneapolis. But during this kind of mini restoration, they did put in a new projector, some new sound system, some new electrical, and so on. So successful. It was, and really kind of got it started as, say, a nonprofit. And then moving up to 90s, late 90s, Phil Brzezinski was involved. Bob Baker managed it for many years. Many of you know, probably know that. There's some names you recognize here. So between mid-90s up to 2000, this is really when Phil became involved. This is his wife Sue Ann in the picture, and some other names you might recognize there. So this was, an effort was really organized to work on the lobby, which needed a lot of work, and to put a few safety features that had to be addressed. So a plan was drawn up and money was raised, and we used almost all local help, because listed in this in one of the articles, I don't want to forget, let's see, Tim Marr worked on the lobby, Mitchell's did the flooring, let's see, Ed Paulskill was in here, Trevor Stevenson, so Dan's plumbing, and Ulrich Seeloff was recruited to help with a restroom mirror that was brought in, that was purchased, that didn't fit. It was the wrong size for the frame, and we had a grand opening that was going to happen quite soon, so evidently they took the mirror over to Mitchell's Hardware. Mark Mitchell cut it down. Ulrich took it to the Seeloff Corp, built a new frame for it, and hung it up, and were able to open on opening night. So, community effort. But this is what it looked like. So, this was the theater for quite a few years, and this is what it looked like when we moved here in '98. And as you can see, all that beautiful plaster was cut away. And it looks smaller than it is. I mean, it's a little bit of a truncated photo, but there are about 200 seats downstairs, and the upstairs were still original. That never really changed upstairs. Projection booth, as you see, is much bigger. The windows are bigger. We had this electrical or lighting and sound. The sound booth with glass in it doesn't make much sense, but it was a lighting booth with the window you can see there. But most, at this point, it was operable, and but it was very much during the 2000s on everybody's mind to bring it back to what it was, because it really, the interior just had kind of been ruined in a lot of ways. So these doors were shifted. As you can see, these doors are very ornate. You've got all the trim around the doors, and they're centered in that beautiful plaster pattern. The door was moved. Some of the things are kind of inexplicable, not really sure why some of those things are there. But anyway, it was in need of a restoration. So in 2008, another committee was formed, and Phil was spearheading this. Phil Brzezinski was spearheading the effort. Jim Cackley, community leader, got involved, and Greg Bennett from the city was very much behind it. And we started making plans for a major restoration. So bids, there was a historic structures report that had to be developed, and we had to bid for that. We had to bid for contractors, historic preservation architectural firms, basically, to give us ideas. And we were able to go back to Conrad Schmidt, who was the original creator of all the fretwork, all the plaster work in here. So they were a Milwaukee company. So after raising funds, and that did come together pretty quickly, we got a major grant from the Jeffers Foundation. That was when I got involved with the Opera House. I was part of the restoration committee, and many people were involved. Coleman and Tim Moore was involved in the early part, and there were an awful lot of people involved. It sort of whittled down to a smaller group and a board. And when the decisions were made to do the inside, it was decided that we would go with, so Strang Architects was from Madison, and they did a lot of preservation work. They did the Capitol, and then Conrad Schmidt was able to come on board and kind of study where we were before, if you remember. So here's where we were before the restoration. Here's where we were originally. So to try and make a modern theater out of the beauty that was intended, the beauty that was here before, bringing back at the very least, that the decor around the boxes to really make it symmetrical and have it more of a cozy feel. So we were pretty excited. Everybody was pretty excited. We were able to pull down. This is just before we closed. So this is a view from the balcony. So there is still, all folded up here, rolled up here in the fly, the original fire curtain from 1915. And it's a hand-painted scene of either Como or a beautiful lake in Italy, Lake Garda, something in Italy. So it's a beautiful scene that is completely coated with asbestos on the back. So we took it down, we all had masks on, but we wanted, to get some pictures of it, and it probably should be removed, but it's safely rolled up now. It's just kind of a piece of history, so it was fun to bring it down, and I think there was a picture in the newspaper as well. So we embarked on the restoration, Conrad Schmidt and Strang, and we'd hired Daniels Construction to start the renovation. So that was one of the things that began after we pulled the seats out and started a lot of the mechanicals. This was a $2.4 million restoration. So there was a lot of money that just went to a new, whatever you call the thing that goes on the roof for all the HVAC, and a new fire safety system. We didn't even have sprinklers that were adequate in here. We were out of code. One of the funny things was, as Phil knew, we were out of fire code for many, many years. And there was a fire marshal in Madison who had our citation on her desk, and somehow she and Phil had a deal that whenever it came to the top of her pile, she'd put it on the bottom again. So we were able to keep running the theater, but we definitely needed fire safety. And I just remember us looking around saying, we didn't want to put sprinklers in this place, but I don't think anybody notices them probably at this point but me. It still kind of bothers me that they're here, but we had to drill holes in the plaster to put those in. But there's a huge monster of a fire safety system, and we have a monitoring system here. It's all very safe now. New plumbing, we had all steam heat here. We had a big boiler in the basement, and so that was all pulled out. And the funny thing about this is we contracted with Daniels for the construction. We contracted with Conrad Schmidt to do the plaster repair, and somehow there was a snafu in the plans. The architect, it was one of those, oh, not me. The architect had the plans, Strang had the plans for this build out. As you see, it's just kind of a bump out, from walking from those row of seats up. There's a bump out with all that plaster. And it was in the plan, but somehow neither Daniels or Conrad Schmidt bid on it, included their cost to do it. So when it came down to it, they were sort of confused as to, and we were, really had to go back to the architect to say, we have to do this, somebody has to figure it out. And Conrad Schmidt and Daniels actually both split the cost of it and only charged us for materials. Neither one charged us for labor, so it was really a nice nice gesture on both parts, and they were, I mean, we all kind of became family. We were in here all the time. These two guys did the plaster work. They were from Conrad Schmidt and trained by the Italian masters who had been, who were famous at Conrad Schmidt for this kind of work all throughout the country. But these two guys worked, if you could imagine, you know, all of this proscenium arch, all of this. They worked weeks on end, and they basically camped out here. And after a couple weeks, they actually asked if we could pay them every Friday, and could we pay them in cash, because they went straight to Dubuque to the casinos. And hung out there for the weekend, and they came here with sleeping bags, basically, and slept here for the weekends. But they were funny, and they just knew what they were doing. And you know, this gilt, as you can see, it's not kind of in your face gold. It's what they would do is paint it on and then wipe it off, and you get that beautiful relief. So Conrad Schmidt, I keep bringing up their name. They are, you know, a very well-known decorative arts company, still operating in Milwaukee, and any building restoration would be lucky to get them. But this was just a fortuitous moment. We were able to find, I actually found this in the library. There used to be an entrance, a downstairs entrance to the library, kind of between City Hall and the library. You could go in this little door, and as you walked in there, there was another door that was always open, and then you could go in the kind of downstairs of the old library. And one day we were working on this, and I pulled the door, and this picture's hanging behind it. This watercolor from Conrad Schmidt, painted in 1913, when the city was planning the Opera House. So this was the rendering that Conrad Schmidt painted and presented to the city to say, this is what your Opera House can look like. And so nobody really knew it was there. So we were able to show it to the project manager from Conrad Schmidt, and he was thrilled because so we still own this. It's actually on, the library owns it. We borrowed it for now on a long-term loan, and hopefully we can find a place to hang here at some point. But this, unfortunately, this is the original, but Conrad Schmidt had copies of it and other versions of it, but they had a big fire in the 30s, and they lost so much. And this was lost. They lost a lot of their artwork and a lot of their old files. So they were thrilled to get it, and they made a reproduction of it. But what was fun for us is we were able to really see what maybe could have been back in 1915 had the city had more money. So we didn't go with all of the painting details, but we were able to outline, to add this blue. We actually chipped away underneath the boxes. There were layers and layers and layers of paint, and when they chipped down and got to the very bottom, this pretty blue, this pretty kind of eggshell blue was there. So that's what they were able to paint match it, and find that historic shade, and that's what we painted up here. But anyway, that was really fun to find. So this is a picture from, so this would have been scaffolding that was, you could walk up to the balcony stairs and then climb up to this, and then you could touch this arch up here. It was really amazing to be way up there. I told Phil to put his initials. He put his initials way up there. I don't know if he did or not, but yeah. So this was, a good year process, and the attention to detail was not missed. So just close-ups of some of the plaster. So this is the air vent that's at the top of the balcony. And it was always painted white, so nobody noticed it, and we just had it done in gold. And there were so many people who were like, "Oh, we love the new vent that you put in." This was from 1915. It shows off now. So this is in our logo. This is on a lot of our programs and correspondence and so on. Okay, so now this. So this was in the State Journal. So this was just Barry Adams, who worked for the State Journal, was always coming out here. So this was advertising we're reopening, so this was put out probably a couple weeks before. And it was really in depth, which was nice. But you can see, brand new carpet. So the carpeting was we got to pick that out. You know, there were just a lot of fun steps. That was a historic, it wasn't here before, but it was a historic pattern in the carpet, which is hopefully here for time to come. And let's see. This was the program for the opening weekend. So we had the Big Top Chautauqua come, who had played here years ago. So and then we had, let's see, yeah, then we just gave tours in the afternoon. And then this is what the community, the misleading lady. And then we had community members singing, performing, had the dancers in here, so. And the city, the Mineral Point High School brass band played in here. There's the Mitchell Sisters, Ballet Girls. This was a young woman in town, happens to be my daughter, playing for Elise, Beethoven's for Elise. Let's remember her. She was like so many pages of sheet music for that piece. But this was, within the first year, we were able to acquire this 1937 Steinway piano. Leslie DeMasso found it in Platteville, and it had been perfectly restored. And while there were always uprights in here in the early days, there always was a piano in the theater. There hadn't been a grand, so unless people brought them on the train. But so this was acquired, and Leslie was able to bring her piano students in to play a whole afternoon of kind of really their own pieces, and it's a wonderful recital. And then community events. So here was, then, through the years, and that's really what I'm going to show you next, is just, we've remained open. We are a nonprofit. Board members have changed. There's some former board members here. Jerry Gawley's in the audience. There's Joy Giesecke. There are so many people who were involved and on the board through the years. Candy Kyler was often on the board for quite a few years. But, we made a decision as a nonprofit to just put as many live performances in here as we can. And still a movie house, and as you know, we still have film festivals and so on, but just to show you, we've had such a variety of music in here, and everyone who plays in here absolutely loves the theater, because the acoustics are perfect. It's an intimate theater. We're considered, there's certain thresholds for theaters. We're considered an under 400 seat theater. Some bands won't play, some performers won't play an under 400 seat theater, but there are some that just love the intimacy of it, so we're lucky in that way. Here was Lunart, classical production that wasn't too long ago. Oops. Nutcracker is here every other year, and the sets are amazing for that, the backdrops, and they come up and down, in our fly. I didn't mention that, but I will, it's important, that we're considered a hemp house. That's also a category of theaters. It's an old term, but we still are a hemp house. We still have hemp ropes and a sandbag system. That's how we pull up and down the backdrops. And the hemp ropes have been replaced, but not that many times through the years. Hemp is a really, really strong fiber, and it served us well. And when I mentioned Raleigh earlier, he was the guy who would climb way up there and walk up on the fly and reattach the ropes. And there were a lot of people who spent time way up there. But anyway, that's how we would fly the sets. So this is one that has spectacular sets. Here's our very own Monica and Aaron Dunn, Maker and Maiden, and Point 5, as we know, has played our stage many times, the talent of our local group. This is a great shot from behind the stage, so you can see what the performers see. And this was in lieu of holding up your lighter that we used to do at concerts, our cell phone lights. But a great shot. I think this might be
We Banjo 3.
We Banjo 3? Thank you, whoever that is. Yes. This is poignant in that We Banjo 3 was the last band who played in here. They played here March 11th, I believe, 2020. It was a sold out show, every seat. And then we closed for a year and a half. So, and this was, one of those things, do we do the show? Do we do the show? We don't have COVID here yet, but we did the show, everybody showed, and then we had to close. So we were closed for a year and a half. And we opened with the Driftless Film Festival in November. And Bill Webb, who's our president now, is responsible for, for pulling that together. We've had various people involved in this, but here we are on stage with masks. Claudia Luz, who also works in the archives with Shan. She and Tony are filmmakers, and she couldn't be here today because she's ill, but she helped a lot with this production. But people sat 3 seats apart. We had a tent outside to sell tickets. Here, I want to show you the kids. This is a kids' COVID show. If you can see, they have plastic masks over their face, plastic shields. The lead singers had plastic shields. The chorus had masks on, but the show went on, and those plucky kids were able to still do that. And here is a New Orleans band, I believe. Everybody on their feet, which we all love to see. Nice black and white photograph. And then here's another school show. This was Hamlet, if anybody saw this. So high school musicals are generally they're either November or they're spring. And they have immense talent amongst these kids. This Hamlet production was I don't even have words for it. It was so well done. Here was another one in the spring with some local kids you may recognize. And here's Elvis. So he's been here a few times, and we got to do tribute bands. It really brings in people, and everybody loves to sing the songs. They know every word too. So that's something we all enjoy. And here was just the set for the Christmas concert that was just done in December. We had piano recital. We took some pictures from the projection booth. So there's still this big monster projector in there. There were the big things that had the big reels that feed them into the projector. That obviously is no longer used. Everything is digital. But we still have a lot of the old reels. And this is the view from the window up there. So the projectionist would sit and look out, on the house. And so it's a fun view from way up there. And Steve, our illustrious lighting and behind the scenes guy who does so much, is thinking of moving the lighting booth up to this area. So we'll reuse the projection booth. It's kind of been closed off for a while. And this is our dressing room. Hand-me-down furniture, but it works. It's kind of like a real hangout place. But we had, this is part of the restoration. The dressing rooms were abysmal before. So we have 2 ADA accessible restrooms. We still have this corrugated metal. There are 2 dressing rooms on either side that are supposedly original. The fire safety stuff is in the back, but it's a real lighted, well-lighted and well-used dressing room. This is a little sitting area that took this because it shows you the original doors in the back. So those are straight under us here that go out to Jail Alley and open like this, and there's a ramp. And that was where the carriages would go from the train, pick up the trunks and the sets, come up Commerce Street, up Jail Alley, and we'd open those doors and they'd bring the trunks in. So now we just take the garbage out through there. It's where the ramp is still there, just still another piece of history, and a lot of the posters that we get whenever someone plays here, we have them sign the posters. And start to have them. Now that I've spent so much time in the archives, it's so frustrating to look at things and not see a date. So not see a year. So we have dates, but we don't have years. So we're going to start putting the years on all of those. And from 100 years from now, if someone is sitting up here doing the historical Lyceum, we will have those kinds of things to look at. So in closing, again, here's what the theater looked like in 1915. Here's what it looked like for about 50 years. And that was taken off the Point Theater marquee, but you can see the original structure was underneath that. So in the 90s, I believe, I think it was Tim Marr who then rebuilt the marquee to have it look very similar to what it looked like then, and painted it brown. The whole kind of building trim was cream and brown at different times. So this is what it looked like up until about mid-2000, and then Frank and Sandy Beeman. Frank Beeman's suggestion was, that's an awful font. He's a journalist. He very familiar with fonts, and didn't like the font that we had up there in that little rack. So he and Sandy gifted us with, if you could just see the difference here, the font was improved, and we had metal letters fabricated and put up there. But this shows in 2020, while we were closed, the city took the opportunity to take the marquee off. It really was unsafe after so many kind of iterations, and that original structure underneath all of that wood was from 1915. So there were still steel arms and steel beams that came out that were attached to the building that held it on. So it was, it was safe, but there were birds' nests in there. There were some wonky the tin tiles underneath were all bent, and it was quite a water hazard as well. There was just a gutter pipe that came off the end that went right down to the sidewalk that wasn't very effective of keeping the sidewalk clear of ice. So the city took it down. They did an engineer's report, and it was deemed unsafe. So now, as a board, we're looking to replace the marquee. This is what it looks like now, which I can barely look at. Right now, it has the Christmas greenery up front. It looks a little better across that part. But so as a group, we are and have been working on getting approvals for a new marquee design, and we received some grant money from through Mark Pocan's office, was able to get us a congressional award, basically put into the appropriations bill that was signed in 2022. It was signed in 2023, it was written in 22. So in 23, we were eligible for the Save America's Treasures grant to try and fund the restoration of it. So we're working on that now. We may shift gears. The thought is now to shift gears and to work to restore the tuck pointing, the brickwork basically on the building. There's a lot of external things that need to happen. So the MPS money is probably, the National Park Service is the entity that brings the issues Save America's Treasures and Preserve America's Treasures grants. So we're working with them. We have not gotten a design approved yet. It's been an arduous process to go through the SHPO, which is the State Historic Preservation Office, and the city entity, the historic group as well. So we're working on a marquee that we'd like to have that will light up the street again, but it's based on the original 1915 design. It's just updated with LED lighting, and the name Mineral Point Opera House will be in lights. So that's what we're working towards. There's just been a lot of roadblocks for a lot of different reasons, but we're underway soon. And hopefully within this next year, we'll have the marquee up. And that's a wrap.